Welcome back to Her Real Stories, where we share incredible true tales of survival, strength, and justice. I'm your host, and today's story will absolutely shock you. If you've ever felt underestimated because of your age, or if family members have ever treated you as disposable, this story is for you. A 59-year-old woman named Sierra thought she was going on a peaceful family road trip. Instead, her own son and his wife abandoned her in the desert to die. But what happened next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. These stories need to be heard. And if this tale of survival and justice resonates with you, our community would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's see how one woman turned her greatest betrayal into her ultimate triumph. My name is Sierra Sampson, and at 59, I thought I knew everything about betrayal. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when my son Derek called me. His voice carried that familiar tone, the one he used when he wanted something but tried to sound casual about it. Mom, Jessica, and I were thinking maybe we could take a little road trip together? Reconnect as a family. I paused, my hand tightening around my pearl necklace, a nervous habit I developed over the years. Derek was 32, and in the past 5 years since he'd married Jessica, our relationship had become strained. She had a way of making me feel like an intruder in my own son's life, always with that sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart," I said, genuinely hopeful. "Where were you thinking?" "Just a drive through Nevada. See the desert, maybe visit some small towns. Jessica's been stressed with work, and I thought the three of us could use some quality time." The irony of those words would haunt me later. I should have trusted my instincts. Over the years, Jessica had made subtle comments about how I was getting older and how I should consider downsizing my life. She'd suggested I sell my house, the beautiful Victorian home I'd spent 30 years restoring, and move into a retirement community. For your own good, she'd always add with that practiced smile. But I was lonely. My husband had passed 3 years ago, and Derek was my only child. The thought of spending time with him, even with Jessica there, felt like a gift I couldn't refuse. "When were you thinking?" I asked. "This weekend? We could leave Friday morning, make it a long weekend." I agreed immediately, my heart swelling with hope. Maybe this was the beginning of healing our fractured relationship. Maybe Jessica was finally ready to accept me as part of their family. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and perfect weather. I dressed carefully in a cream-colored blouse and tailored navy pants, fastening my favorite pearl earrings. At 59, I'd maintained my appearance well, regular exercise, good skincare, and the kind of natural elegance that money could enhance but never create from nothing. My gray hair fell in soft waves past my shoulders, and I'd learned to embrace its silver beauty rather than fight it with dye. Derek pulled into my driveway at exactly 9 a.m., driving his new Range Rover. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wore designer sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. "Sierra," she called out, her voice artificially bright. "You look amazing. Doesn't she, Derek?" My son nodded absently, already focused on loading my small overnight bag into the back. I'd packed light, just essentials for 2 nights, plus my purse with my phone, wallet, and the usual items a woman carries. The first few hours of the drive were pleasant enough. We talked about Derek's work at the advertising firm, Jessica's job at the art gallery, and my recent volunteer work at the animal shelter. I sat in the back seat, watching the landscape change from suburban neighborhoods to open highway, feeling cautiously optimistic. But as we drove deeper into Nevada, something shifted. Their conversation became more private, filled with inside jokes and shared glances. I found myself studying the back of Jessica's head, noticing how she would lean into Derek when she spoke, creating an intimate bubble that excluded me entirely. "So, Sierra," Jessica said suddenly, turning to face me with that smile. "Derek tells me you've been thinking about making some changes to your living situation." I blinked, confused.
I'm sorry.
"Your house. It's so big for just one person. And all those stairs. Derek's worried about you." My son's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror for just a moment before looking away. "I never said." "Oh, but you did, honey," Jessica interrupted sweetly. "Remember? You said your mom might be happier in a place where she wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep." The conversation felt like quicksand. The more I tried to navigate it, the deeper I sank. "I love my house," I said quietly. "I have no intention of leaving it." Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Of course not now. But eventually." We stopped for lunch at a small diner in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place with red vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since 1985. Derek excused himself to use the restroom, leaving Jessica and me alone. "You know, Sierra," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate slowness, "Derek and I have been talking about our future. About starting a family." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, the thought of grandchildren filled me with joy. Yes, well, children are expensive. And Derek's inheritance, well, it would certainly help us provide the kind of life we want for our kids. The words hit me like ice water. I stared at her, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the calculation behind her pretty features. "My will is my business, Jessica." "Oh, absolutely," she said quickly. "I'm just saying, Derek is your only child. And when the time comes..." She shrugged elegantly. Derek returned before I could respond, sliding into the booth beside his wife. The rest of lunch passed in uncomfortable silence, with me picking at my sandwich while they discussed their upcoming vacation to Europe, a trip I hadn't known about until that moment. Back in the car, the atmosphere grew stranger. Derek had taken a different route, heading deeper into the desert on smaller roads. When I asked about it, he mumbled something about taking the scenic route and turned up the music. Jessica kept checking her phone and giggling at messages. At one point, she showed Derek the screen, and they both burst into laughter. "What's so funny?" I asked from the back seat. "Oh, just something silly," Jessica said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You wouldn't get it." The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. It was beautiful and terrible, vast and empty in a way that made you feel both insignificant and strangely connected to something eternal. "We should head back soon," I said, checking my watch. "It's getting late." "Actually, Mom," Derek said, and something in his voice made my blood chill. "We need to make a stop first." He pulled the car over onto a dirt road that led nowhere I could see. Nothing but sagebrush and sand stretched to the horizon in every direction. No other cars, no buildings, no signs of civilization. "Why are we stopping here?" I asked, though part of me already knew something was terribly wrong. Derek turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart beating. Jessica turned around to face me, and her mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, artificial smile was gone, replaced by something cold and triumphant. "Get out, Sierra." "Excuse me?" "Get out of the car." Her voice was different now, harder, crueler. "This is where you get off." I looked at my son, waiting for him to tell his wife to stop being ridiculous, to defend me, to be the man I'd raised him to be. Instead, Derek avoided my eyes and said quietly, "Just get out, Mom." The world seemed to tilt. "Derek, what's going on? This isn't funny." Jessica laughed, that same breaking glass sound from the diner. "Oh, but it is funny, Sierra. It's hilarious. The look on your face right now." She pulled out her phone and took a picture of me sitting in the back seat, confused and frightened. "This is going to make such a great story," she said, showing Derek the photo. They both dissolved into laughter again. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "You're going to leave me here? In the middle of the desert?" "It's just a prank, Mom," Derek said, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. "You'll figure it out. You're smart." "A prank?" My voice rose. "Derek, there's nothing here. No water, no shelter." "Should have thought about that before you decided to be so stubborn about the house," Jessica said sweetly. "Maybe this will give you time to reconsider your priorities." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. But worse was the silence for my son, my child, whom I'd loved and protected and sacrificed for his entire life. "Derek, please," I said one last time, "don't do this." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across his face, doubt, maybe even regret. But Jessica reached over and squeezed his hand. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "She needs to learn." Derek's expression hardened. "Get out, Mom. Now." With shaking hands, I opened the car door and stepped onto the desert floor. My heels immediately sank into the sand. I still had my purse clutched against my chest, the only thing they'd let me keep. Jessica rolled down the window as Derek started the engine. "Don't look so dramatic, Sierra," she called out. "Someone will come along eventually. Probably." They drove away laughing, leaving me standing in the desert as the sun began to set. The sound of their engine faded until there was nothing but silence and the vast, empty sky. I stood there for a long time, watching the road where their car had disappeared, waiting for them to come back, waiting for Derek to realize what he'd done and return for his mother. But deep down, I already knew they weren't coming back. As darkness fell and the desert temperature began to drop, I understood with crystal clarity that my son and his wife had just tried to kill me. They'd called it a prank, but pranks don't leave 60-year-old women alone in the desert without water or shelter. Standing there under the star-filled sky, listening to the distant howl of coyotes, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who had spent her life being accommodating, who had swallowed Jessica's insults and Derek's indifference, who had hoped and forgiven and made excuses, that woman died in the desert that night. What emerged in her place was someone harder. Someone who understood that survival sometimes requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. I began to walk. Before we continue with Sierra's incredible journey, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Like this video if Sierra's strength inspires you, subscribe for more real stories of resilience, and ring that notification bell, because sometimes the most powerful transformations happen to those who refuse to give up. Now, let's see how Sierra survived her first night in the desert. The desert at night is a different creature entirely from its daytime self. Where the sun had been merciless, the darkness brought a cold that cut through my cream-colored blouse like a blade. I wrapped my arms around myself and kept walking, my heels clicking against rocks and occasionally sinking into patches of sand. I had no idea which direction led to civilization. In my panic and shock, I hadn't paid attention to landmarks or road signs. The darkness was so complete that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, guided only by the faint starlight that seemed impossibly far away. Every sound made me freeze: the rustle of something moving through the brush, the distant cry of what I hoped was a bird, the scratch of small creatures I couldn't identify. I thought about mountain lions and snakes, and all the ways the desert could kill someone like me. But mostly I thought about Derek. I remembered the day he was born, how perfect and small he'd been, how he gripped my finger with his tiny hand like he never wanted to let me go. I remember teaching him to ride a bike, staying up all night when he had the flu, driving hours to watch his soccer games even when my marriage was falling apart and money was tight. I remembered working 2 jobs to pay for his college tuition when his father left us with nothing but debt. I remembered celebrating his graduation, his first job, his engagement to Jessica. I remembered thinking that maybe, finally, I'd done enough. Maybe I'd raised a good man who would take care of his family the way his father never had. The memory that hurt most was from just 6 months ago. Derek had called me, drunk and crying, saying he wasn't sure he wanted to marry Jessica. "She's different than I thought, Mom," he'd sobbed. "She says things she wants me to cut ties with people. With you." I'd driven to his apartment at midnight, held him while he cried, and talked him through his doubts. I told him that marriage was about compromise, that Jessica was probably just nervous about sharing him with his family. I'd encouraged him to work things out with her. I'd basically talked my own son into marrying the woman who had just left me to die. By dawn, I was stumbling more than walking. My feet were bleeding inside my heels, and I'd long since taken them off to walk barefoot. The desert floor was rough with rocks and thorny plants that tore at my clothes and skin. My throat felt like sandpaper, and my lips were starting to crack. The sunrise was spectacular and terrifying, beautiful colors spreading across the sky, while the temperature began its inexorable climb toward what I knew would be deadly heat. I needed to find shelter and water, or I would die out here just as they'd intended. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a piece of corrugated roofing, partially collapsed but still providing some shade. Beneath it were the remains of what might have been a small shelter or storage building, long since abandoned. More importantly, I could hear the sound of dripping water. I followed the sound and found a miracle, an old, rusted pipe that emerged from the ground and leaked a steady drip into a small depression in the rock. The water was muddy and tasted of metal, but it was water. I cupped my hands and drank deeply, then splashed some on my face and neck. For the first time since Derek had driven away, I felt something like hope. I settled into the shade of the collapsed shelter and took inventory. My purse contained my phone, no signal, my wallet with about $60 in cash and several credit cards, my keys, lip balm, tissues, reading glasses, and a small bottle of aspirin. Not exactly survival gear, but something. I tried to remember everything I'd ever heard about desert survival. Stay in shade during the day, travel at night. Conserve water. Signal for help if possible. Don't panic. Too late on that last one. I spent the day dozing fitfully in the shade, sipping tiny amounts of the metallic water and trying to plan my next move. When evening came and the temperature began to drop, I began walking again. This time, I was more methodical. I followed what looked like an old road or trail, reasoning that it must lead somewhere eventually. I walked all night, resting only when I absolutely had to. By the second morning, I was hallucinating. I saw Derek as a little boy, running toward me across the desert with his arms outstretched. I saw my late husband beckoning to me from a mirage of green trees and flowing water. I saw Jessica laughing and taking photos while I stumbled and fell. But I kept walking. The sun was approaching its zenith when I heard the sound of engines. Real engines, not the phantom noises my mind had been creating. I climbed to the top of a small rise and saw it, a highway in the distance, with actual cars driving on it. I don't remember much about the next hour. Somehow, I made it to the road. Somehow, a truck driver named Pete saw me stumbling along the shoulder and stopped. Somehow, I ended up in the cab of his 18-wheeler, wrapped in a blanket and sipping water from a bottle that tasted like heaven. "Jesus, lady," Pete said as he radioed for an ambulance. "What happened to you? You look like you've been through hell." I stared at my reflection in his side mirror. My gray hair was tangled with thorns and dust, my clothes were torn and stained, My face was sunburned and scratched. But my eyes were different. Harder. Colder. I was abandoned, I said simply. Abandoned? Out here? Who the hell would do something like that? I met his shocked gaze in the mirror. My son. The paramedics who arrived 20 minutes later wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused. I was dehydrated and exhausted, cut up and burned, but I was alive. And I had things to do. At least let us check you out, one of them insisted. You could have internal injuries, heat stroke. I'm fine, I said firmly. I just need to get to the nearest town. Pete, bless him, drove me to a small desert community called Barstow. As we pulled into town, he kept shaking his head and muttering about what kind of people would leave a woman my age alone in the desert. You want to call the police? He asked as he helped me down from the cab. What those folks did to you, that's attempted murder in my book. I considered it. For about 30 seconds, I imagined Derek and Jessica being arrested, charged, convicted. I imagined them trying to explain to a judge that it had been just a prank. But that would be justice, and justice wasn't what I wanted anymore. No, I said quietly. Thank you, but no. Pete looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him recognizing something in my expression that made him take a step back. Ma'am, he said carefully, I don't know what you're planning, but maybe you should think about it real careful-like. I smiled at him, the first genuine smile I'd felt in days. Oh, I intend to think about it very carefully indeed. He drove away shaking his head, and I walked into the little town of Barstow to begin planning my revenge. The first thing I did was find a motel and pay for a room with cash. The desk clerk, a weathered woman in her 40s, looked at my appearance with concern. Honey, you need me to call someone? The police? A hospital? I need a shower and a phone, I said. And maybe you could point me toward a place that sells clothes? An hour later, showered and wearing a simple sundress I'd bought at the local Walmart, I sat on the bed and stared at my phone. I had 47 missed calls from Derek and 31 from Jessica. The voicemail started apologetic and increasingly frantic. Message 1, Derek. Mom, hey, it's me. Look, I know you're probably mad, but it really was just a prank. Call me back, okay? We're worried. Message 15, Jessica. Sierra, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. We were just having a little fun. Call Derek. Message 15, Jessica. Sierra, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. We were just having a little fun. Call Derek back right now. Message 30, Derek. Mom, please. We drove back to look for you, but couldn't find you anywhere. This has gone on long enough. Just call me. Message 47, Jessica. Listen, you crazy old woman. I don't know what game you're playing, but Derek is beside himself. If something happened to you, if you're hurt or, God forbid, dead, this is going to ruin our lives. So stop being dramatic and call us back. I deleted all the messages without responding. Then I called my lawyer. Franklin Hayes had handled my legal affairs for 15 years, ever since my husband's death. He was a sharp man in his 60s who had always given me straight talk and sound advice. Sierra, he said, sounding surprised. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Are you all right? You sound different. I finished. I need to see you, Franklin. As soon as possible. Of course. Is everything okay? I looked at myself in the motel room mirror, at the woman who had walked out of the desert with eyes like flint and a heart turned to stone. Everything's perfect, I said. I'll be in your office first thing Monday morning. And Franklin, I need to make some changes to my will. I spent the weekend in Barstow, recovering my strength and thinking. The small desert town was quiet, the kind of place where people minded their own business and strangers could disappear into anonymity. Perfect for what I needed to do. I bought proper clothes, comfortable shoes, and basic supplies. I ate regular meals and drank plenty of water, feeling my body slowly recover from its ordeal. But my mind was working with a clarity I'd never experienced before. It was as if the desert had burned away everything soft and accommodating about me, leaving only the essential core. For 59 years, I'd been the good woman, the understanding wife, the forgiving mother. I'd made excuses for people who hurt me, given second chances to those who didn't deserve them, and swallowed my own needs in service of keeping peace. That woman had died in the sand and sagebrush. What emerged was someone who understood that sometimes the only response to cruelty is to return it with interest. On Monday morning, I drove my rental car, paid for with cash, of course, back to Los Angeles and walked into Franklin Hayes's office. His secretary did a double take when she saw me. "Mrs. Sampson? My goodness, you look different," I said with a smile. "Is Franklin available?" Franklin's reaction was even more pronounced. He stared at me for a full 10 seconds before gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sierra, what on earth happened to you? You look like you've been through some kind of transformation." "In a way, I have." I settled into the leather chair and crossed my legs. "I need to make some changes to my estate planning." "Of course, but first, are you all right? You seem, I'm not sure how to put this." "Harder," I suggested. "More focused? It's amazing what a little clarity can do for a person." Franklin pulled out my file and opened it on his desk. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "I want Derek completely removed from my will." He blinked. "Completely? Sierra, he's your only child." "Are you sure?" "Completely. Everything I own, everything I've built, every penny. I want it to go elsewhere." "Where?" I smiled. "I'll let you know. But first I want to set up a trust. Something that will take effect immediately, not upon my death." For the next 2 hours, we worked out the details. It was more complicated than I'd expected, but Franklin was thorough and creative. By the time I left his office, my assets were protected in ways that would take Derek and Jessica months to untangle, if they ever could. "Sierra," Franklin said as I prepared to leave, "I have to ask, what brought this on? Last time we spoke, you were talking about setting up college funds for Derek's future children." I paused at his office door. "Have you ever had someone you love try to kill you, Franklin?" His face went pale.
Jesus Christ, Sierra.
"What happened?" "Nothing I can't handle," I said. "Just make sure those documents are filed immediately. And Franklin, if anything happens to me, anything at all, I want you to look very closely at my son and his wife." I left him staring after me with his mouth open. The next phase of my plan required patience. I drove home to my beautiful Victorian house, the house Jessica had been so eager for me to sell, and walked through rooms filled with memories. Antique furniture I'd carefully collected over decades, art I'd chosen with love, books that had shaped my thinking, photos of a life well lived. Derek had grown up in this house. He'd taken his first steps on these hardwood floors, hidden behind these curtains during games of hide and seek, brought friends home to this kitchen after school. Every room held some memory of him as the sweet, loving child he'd once been. Looking at those photos now, I wondered when exactly he'd stopped being that child and become the man who could leave his mother to die in the desert. My phone had been buzzing constantly since Monday morning. More calls from Derek, more increasingly hysterical voicemails from Jessica. I let them all go to voicemail, listening to their messages each evening like a daily news report from the enemy camp. "Mom, please, I'm begging you." Derek sobbed in message number 63. "Jessica feels terrible about what happened. We both do. It was supposed to be funny, just a little scare. We never meant for you to be gone for so long. Please call me back." But it was Jessica's messages that revealed the most. As the days passed and I didn't respond, her mask slipped further and further. "This is insane, Sierra," she hissed in message number 81. You're acting like we committed some horrible crime. It was a prank. A joke. You're fine, aren't you? You survived. So stop punishing Derek for trying to have a little fun. He's barely eating, barely sleeping. If you cared about your son at all, you'd call him back. And then, in message number 97, you selfish bitch. Do you know what this is doing to Derek? Do you care? Or are you so narcissistic that you can't see past your own hurt feelings? We're sorry, okay? There, I said it. We're sorry. Now stop being a drama queen and call your son. I saved that one. I had a feeling it would be useful later. By Thursday, I was ready for the next phase. I called Derek. He answered on the first ring.
Mom?
Mom. Oh, thank God. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Where are you? The panic in his voice was so raw, so genuine, that for a moment I felt a flicker of the old Sierra. The mother who wanted to comfort her child, who would forgive anything to ease his pain. Then I remembered the sound of their laughter as they drove away. I'm fine, Derek, I said calmly. I'm at home. At home? How did you? Never mind, it doesn't matter.
Mom, I am so sorry.
What we did was wrong. It was stupid. It was attempted murder, I said quietly. Silence on the other end of the line.
Mom, no.
No, it wasn't like that. It was just. You left a 59-year-old woman alone in the desert with no water, no food, no shelter, and no way to call for help. What exactly did you think was going to happen? We thought you'd figure something out. You're smart, you're resourceful. I nearly died, Derek. Another silence. But you didn't, he said finally, and I could hear Jessica in the background, coaching him. You're okay. You're fine. That's what matters. Is it? Is that what matters?
Mom, please.
Let's not fight about this anymore. Why don't Jessica and I come over? We can talk face to face, work this out like adults. I smiled, looking out the window at my garden where roses bloomed in careful rows. That sounds lovely, sweetheart. Why don't you come for dinner Sunday? I'll make that roast you love. The relief in his voice was almost painful to hear. Really? You're not? You forgive us? There's nothing to forgive. I lied smoothly. It was just a prank, right? Just a little fun between family. I could practically hear his smile through the phone.
Right.
Exactly. Just a prank. Oh, Mom, I love you so much. I was so scared that. I'll see you Sunday at 6, I said, and hung up. Then I called Franklin Hayes one more time. The documents you're preparing, I said when he answered. I need them ready by Monday morning. Sierra, are you sure about this? What you're planning? It's going to devastate your son. I thought about Derek's voice, how quickly he'd accepted my forgiveness, how eager he'd been to minimize what they'd done to me, how he'd called it just a prank, even after I told him I'd nearly died. Franklin, I said quietly, do you have children? 2 daughters. Would either of them leave you to die in the desert and call it a joke? A long pause.
No.
No, they would not. Then you understand why devastation is exactly what Derek deserves. Sunday dinner was a masterpiece of performance. I cooked Derek's favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables, mashed potatoes, apple pie for dessert. I set the table with my good china, lit candles, even wore the pearls he'd given me for my last birthday. When Derek and Jessica arrived, they seemed almost giddy with relief. Derek hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and even Jessica managed what looked like genuine tears. Sierra, I am so sorry, she said, taking my hands in hers. What we did was unforgivable. I don't know what came over me. I've been sick with worry ever since. Water under the bridge, dear, I said with a warm smile. These things happen. During dinner, they regaled me with stories of their European vacation plans, their ideas for redecorating their condo, Jessica's promotion at the gallery. They were relaxed, happy, their guilt apparently washed away by my easy forgiveness. You know, Mom, Derek said as I served the pie, Jessica and I have been talking, and we think maybe we were wrong about the house thing. You should stay here as long as you want. It's your home. How generous of him. Actually, I said, cutting neat slices of apple pie, I've been doing some thinking too. About the future, about my legacy, about what really matters. They both perked up at this, like hunting dogs catching a scent. I've decided to make some changes, I continued. Some big changes. Jessica leaned forward. What kind of changes? I smiled at her, noting how her eyes had sharpened with interest. Well, I've been thinking about what you said, Jessica. About Derek's inheritance, about providing for your future children. Derek looked uncomfortable. Mom, you don't need to. No, I want to, I insisted. Family is the most important thing, isn't it? And after what happened last weekend, I realized how precious our time together really is. They exchanged glances across the table, and I could see the greed glittering in Jessica's eyes. I've made an appointment with my lawyer for tomorrow morning, I said, to update my will. Mom, really, that's not necessary, Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I insist, I said firmly. In fact, why don't you both come with me? I want you to hear exactly what provisions I'm making. Jessica practically vibrated with excitement. That would be wonderful, Sierra. So thoughtful of you. After they left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and the lingering scent of apple cinnamon. Tomorrow, they would learn exactly what kind of provisions I'd made for their future. I thought they'd find them very educational. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of California day that made everything seem possible. I dressed carefully, a navy blue suit, my pearl necklace and matching earrings, my gray hair swept into an elegant chignon. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman of means and dignity who commanded respect. Derek and Jessica arrived at my house precisely on time, both dressed in their best clothes. Jessica wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and Derek had put on the Armani suit I'd given him for Christmas. They looked like they were attending a funeral. In a way, they were. Are you excited, Sierra? Jessica asked as we drove to Franklin's office. This is such a big step. Oh, yes, I said, watching her in the rearview mirror. I'm very excited to see how this all turns out. Franklin's office occupied the top floor of a prestigious building in Century City, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. He greeted us with professional warmth, though I caught the questioning look he gave me when he saw Derek and Jessica. Mrs. Sampson, he said formally, and you must be Derek. I've heard so much about you over the years. Derek smiled and shook his hand. All good things, I hope. Oh, yes, Franklin said smoothly. Your mother has always spoken very highly of you. We settled into the plush chairs around Franklin's conference table. He spread out several documents, his expression carefully neutral. Now then, he began, as you requested, Mrs. Sampson, I've prepared the new will and trust documents according to your specifications. Jessica practically bounced in her chair. Derek tried to look solemn and appropriate, but I could see the anticipation in his eyes. The changes are quite substantial, Franklin continued, looking directly at me. Are you certain you want to proceed? Absolutely certain, I said firmly. He nodded and picked up the first document. Very well. Let me begin with the primary bequest. For the next 20 minutes, Franklin outlined the new provisions of my will in excruciating detail. Jessica's face went through an interesting series of changes, from anticipation to confusion to growing horror. Derek just looked stunned. I'm sorry, Jessica interrupted, her voice tight. Could you repeat that part about the primary beneficiary? Franklin glanced at me, and I nodded for him to continue. As I was saying, the entire estate, including the house, investments, bank accounts, and all personal property, will be placed in a charitable trust upon Mrs. Sampson's death. The beneficiaries will be various animal welfare organizations, environmental groups, and scholarships for underprivileged children. But what about Derek? Jessica's voice had risen an octave. Derek will receive a one-time payment of $5,000, Franklin said calmly. Enough for a nice vacation, I believe, Mrs. Sampson said. The silence in the room was deafening. Derek stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. There must be some mistake, he said finally. Mom, this can't be right. I leaned back in my chair, studying my son's face. Oh, but it is right.
Completely right.
Jessica exploded. This is insane. Derek is your only child. You can't just. I can do whatever I want with my money, Jessica, I said coolly. It is, after all, my money. But why? Derek's voice was barely a whisper. What did we do? The question hung in the air like smoke. I let it linger, watching them both squirm. What did you do? I repeated softly. Well, let me think. You drove me into the desert, threw me out of your car without water or food, and left me to die. Then you drove away laughing. It was a prank. Jessica shrieked. A stupid prank. You said you forgave us.
Elite.
The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief. Mom, Derek said desperately. Please. I know what we did was wrong, but... Wrong. I stood up, my composure never wavering. Wrong is forgetting to call on my birthday. Wrong is being late for dinner. What you did was attempt murder. That's not true. Jessica was on her feet now, her face flushed with rage. You're being dramatic and vindictive and alive. I finished quietly. Which, let's be honest, wasn't part of your plan, was it? Franklin cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a break. No need, I said, gathering my purse. We're finished here. Derek, Jessica, it's been educational. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Derek, don't bother calling. I've changed my number. And Jessica, that European vacation you were planning? I'd book something a little more modest if I were you. I left them sitting there, their faces white with shock, and walked out into the California sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years. But changing my will was only the beginning. Are you feeling Sierra's strength? If this story resonates with you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you would have done in her situation. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories of survival and justice. And remember, if you're going through your own difficult time, our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, offers practical guidance for anyone ready to rebuild their life stronger than before. The link is in the description because your comeback story is waiting to be written. Now, let's see what Sierra does next. The phone calls started within an hour of leaving Franklin's office. Derek called 17 times before I finally answered on the 18th ring. Mom, please, you have to listen to me. Actually, Derek, I don't have to do anything, I said calmly, examining my manicured nails. That's one of the benefits of being a free woman with her own money. This isn't you, he said desperately. This vindictive, cruel person, this isn't my mother. Your mother died in the desert, I replied. What you're talking to now is what survived. I hung up and turned off my phone. For the next 3 days, they tried everything. They showed up at my house. I didn't answer the door. They sent flowers with apology cards. I threw them in the trash. Derek even tried to get my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, to intercede on his behalf. That poor boy is beside himself, she told me over the fence as I tended my roses. He says there's been some terrible misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said, snipping a particularly beautiful bloom, Is Derek thinking he could kill his mother and inherit her money without consequences? Mrs. Chen's face went pale. Surely you're exaggerating. Would you like to see the photos of my injuries? I asked pleasantly. I took quite a few while I was recovering. Very educational. She retreated into her house and didn't speak to me again for weeks. On Thursday, I decided it was time for the next phase of my plan. I called Derek from a block number. Hello. His voice was hoarse, desperate. Derek, it's me.
Mom.
Jesus Christ, where have you been? I've been worried sick. I've been thinking, I said quietly, about us. About what happened. About whether there's any way to repair this. Hope flooded his voice.
Yes.
Yes, there is. Mom, I love you. I know I screwed up, but I love you, and I want to make this right.
Do you?
Do you really? More than anything in the world. I let him hear me sigh, as if I were struggling with a difficult decision. Jessica would have to apologize. A real apology, not the performance she gave at dinner. She will. I'll make sure she does. And you'd both have to prove that you understand how serious this was. That you nearly killed me. We do understand. We absolutely do. Would you be willing to do something to show me that? Something that proves you're truly sorry. Anything, Mom. Name it. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I want you to come with me on another road trip. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had been dropped. Derek? Are you there? A road trip? His voice was barely a whisper. That's right. Back to where it all started. I need to see if I can trust you again, Derek. I need to know that if we're in the same situation, you'd make a different choice. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Then I guess we have nothing more to talk about, I said coolly. Wait. Don't hang up. I'll think about it. You do that. And Derek, you have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires permanently. I hung up and immediately called Franklin. I need you to prepare one more document, I told him. A confession letter. Something that spells out exactly what Derek and Jessica did to me, with all the legal implications clearly stated. Sierra, what are you planning? Justice, Franklin. Pure and simple justice. Derek called back 6 hours later. Okay, he said, his voice shaking. We'll do it. The road trip.
When? This Saturday.
Same route as before. And if we do this, if we prove ourselves, you'll change the will back? I let him wait for my answer, listening to his labored breathing on the other end of the line. We'll see, I said finally. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, as if the sky itself sensed what was coming. Derek and Jessica picked me up at 9 a.m. sharp, both of them looking like they were heading to their own execution. The tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jessica kept fidgeting with her jewelry, casting nervous glances at me in the rear-view mirror. Derek's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. So, Jessica said finally, her voice artificially bright, where exactly are we going? You know where we're going, dear, I said pleasantly. The same place you left me 2 weeks ago. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. We drove in mostly silence after that, the desert landscape rolling past the windows like a film reel of my near-death experience. I recognized landmarks now. The rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the abandoned gas station with its rusted pumps, the exit sign that marked the turnoff to nowhere. Turn here, I said when we reached the dirt road. Derek's hands were visibly shaking now.
Mom, please.
Can't we just talk about this? Can't we work something out without? Turn here, Derek.
He turned.
We drove slowly down the same rutted path they'd taken 2 weeks ago, past the same scrub brush and rocks and endless sand. When we reached the spot, I recognized it by a distinctive Joshua tree that had watched over my abandonment. I told him to stop. This is it, I said quietly. This is where you left me. Jessica was crying now, quiet tears that streaked her makeup. Sierra, please.
We're sorry.
We're so sorry.
Are you?
Are you really? Yes. Derek turned in his seat to face me, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and fear. Mom, I haven't slept in 2 weeks. I've barely eaten. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened to you out here, alone in the dark. But you thought about that when you left me the first time too, didn't you? He stared at me, unable to answer. Didn't you? I pressed. I tried not to think about it, he whispered. Because thinking about it would have ruined the joke? He nodded miserably. I opened my purse and pulled out the document Franklin had prepared. I want you both to sign this. Derek took the paper with trembling hands and read the first few lines. His face went white. This is a confession. It says we committed attempted murder. That's exactly what it says. I can't sign this. If I sign this, we could go to prison. You could go to prison anyway, I pointed out. I have medical records documenting my injuries, photos of the damage to my feet and hands, witness statements from the truck driver who found me. The only question is whether you're going to make this easy or hard on yourselves. Jessica snatched the paper from Derek's hands. This is extortion.
No, dir.
This is consequences. For 10 minutes, we sat in the desert heat while they argued between themselves in whispered, frantic tones. Finally, Derek turned back to me. If we sign this, you'll change the will back? If you sign this, I'll consider it. That's not good enough. It's the only offer you're going to get. Jessica grabbed a pen from the glove compartment and signed her name with angry, jagged strokes. Derek hesitated for a long moment, then did the same. I took the document and folded it carefully into my purse. Excellent. Now get out of the car. The silence was absolute.
What?
Derek's voice cracked. You heard me. Get out of the car. Both of you.
Mom, no.
No, you can't. I can, and I am. I pulled a small revolver from my purse, a .38 special I'd purchased 3 days ago, along with lessons at a shooting range. Get out.
Now.
They stumbled out of the car like sleepwalkers, their faces masks of disbelief and terror. Mom, please, Derek begged. You're not a killer. This isn't who you are. I got out of the back seat and walked around to the driver's side. You're right. I'm not a killer. I'm just someone who believes in symmetry. What do you mean? Jessica's voice was barely audible. I smiled at them both, a cold, terrible smile that made them take a step backward. I mean, my dear children, that you're going to get exactly what you gave me. A chance to survive. A fair shot at making it out of the desert alive. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The difference is, I called out the window. I'm not going to drive away laughing. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving them standing in the exact spot where they'd abandoned me 2 weeks earlier. In the rearview mirror, I could see them getting smaller and smaller until they were just 2 dark spots against the vast expanse of sand and sky. Unlike them, I didn't find it funny at all. I drove exactly 1 mile down the dirt road before pulling over and parking behind a cluster of boulders that hid the car from view. Then I hiked back to a ridge overlooking the spot where I'd left Derek and Jessica, settled into the shade of a large rock with my binoculars, and began to watch. They were exactly where I'd left them, standing close together in the middle of the desert like 2 lost children. Even from a distance, I could see their panic in the way they moved, frantic gestures, Jessica spinning in circles, Derek looking desperately in every direction for some sign of civilization. This was nothing like what they'd done to me. I hadn't driven away laughing and forgotten about them. I was here, watching, making sure they were safe. The gun in my purse wasn't loaded. I wasn't a monster, despite what they might think. And I had no intention of actually letting them die out here. but they didn't know that. Through my binoculars, I watched Derek pull out his phone and hold it up, trying to find a signal. Jessica was screaming something at him, her arms waving wildly. Even at this distance, I could read their body language clearly. They were blaming each other, their unity already cracking under pressure. It had taken me 2 days to walk out of this desert. They were younger, stronger, and they had each other. More importantly, they knew I was still alive, which meant this wasn't really abandonment, it was education. The difference was everything. I settled back against the rocks, opened the thermos of iced tea I'd brought, and watched the 2 people who had tried to kill me begin to understand what they'd put me through. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 100 degrees. Derek had taken off his shirt and was using it to shade Jessica's head. They'd started walking, but they were heading in the wrong direction, deeper into the desert instead of toward the main road. Just like I had. I followed them at a distance, staying on the high ground where I could observe without being seen. Every 20 minutes or so, I checked my own phone, making sure I had signal in case I needed to call for emergency help. Because, unlike my son, I wasn't actually trying to commit murder. Around 2 in the afternoon, they stopped walking and collapsed in the shade of a rock formation. Through my binoculars, I could see them talking intently, Jessica gesturing wildly, while Derek held his head in his hands. I wondered if they were discussing whose idea the original prank had been. I wondered if Derek was finally understanding what he'd done to his mother, or if he was still thinking of this as some kind of extreme therapy session that would eventually end with his inheritance restored. They started moving again as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, and this time they chose the right direction. Derek had always been good with directions as a child. It seemed some instincts were still intact. I followed them for another hour, staying far enough back that they wouldn't spot me even if they looked. As darkness began to fall, I decided it was time for phase 2. I circled around and drove back to town, where I checked into a motel for the night. Then I called Derek's phone. He answered on the first ring.
Mom?
Is that you? His voice was hoarse and desperate. In the background, I could hear Jessica crying. Hello, Derek. Oh, thank God. Mom, please, you have to come back for us. We're lost. We're hurt. Jessica twisted her ankle and... Are you sorry? The question stopped his babbling cold. What? I asked if you were sorry. Really, truly sorry for what you did to me.
Yes.
Yes, we're sorry. We're so fucking sorry, Mom. Please just... Sorry for what, specifically? A long pause. I could hear him breathing hard, could almost see him trying to think of the right answer. We're sorry for leaving you in the desert, he said finally. And for calling it a prank when it wasn't. What was it, Derek? Another pause. It was attempted murder. Yes, it was. Do you understand that now? Really understand it? Yes, he whispered. I understand.
Good.
I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow? Mom, no. Please don't leave us out here all night. There are coyotes and... I hung up. Then I drove back to my ridge and resumed my vigil, watching over them through the night like a guardian angel. Or perhaps like a hunting predator. I wasn't entirely sure there was a difference anymore. They huddled together through the cold desert night, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. I could see the glow of Derek's phone as he tried repeatedly to call me back, but I turned my phone off after our conversation. Dawn brought clear skies and rising heat. Derek and Jessica resumed walking as soon as there was enough light to see, moving more slowly now but still heading in the right direction. Jessica was limping badly, leaning on Derek's arm. Around 10 a.m., I started my car and drove slowly along the dirt road until I spotted them in the distance. Then I honked my horn, 3 long blasts that echoed across the desert floor. Through my binoculars, I watched them freeze, then begin running toward the sound of my car despite Jessica's injured ankle. They stumbled and fell and got back up, their faces wild with hope and desperation. I let them get close enough to see the car clearly, then drove away. I repeated this game 3 more times over the next 2 hours, appearing just long enough to give them hope, then disappearing again before they could reach me. Each time, they looked more exhausted, more desperate, more broken. It was cruel. It was calculated. It was exactly what they deserved. Finally, around noon, I decided they'd learned enough. I drove to where they'd collapsed in whatever shade they could find and got out of the car. They looked up at me with the same expression I'd probably worn when the truck driver found me, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and disbelief that they were going to survive. "Please," Jessica whispered through cracked lips. "Please don't leave us again." I looked down at them both, my son and his wife, reduced to begging in the sand, and felt something that might have been satisfaction. "Get in the car," I said quietly. They scrambled toward the vehicle like drowning people reaching for a life preserver. Derek climbed into the passenger seat while Jessica curled up in the back, both of them drinking greedily from the water bottles I offered. "Thank you," Derek gasped. "Mom, thank you. I thought you were going to let us die." The thought crossed my mind, I admit it, starting the engine. We drove in silence for several miles before Jessica spoke from the back seat. "So, what happens now?" she asked quietly. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her perfectly styled hair was matted with dust and sweat, her expensive makeup streaked and smeared. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had been brought face to face with her own mortality. "Now," I said, "we go home. And you both start the rest of your lives knowing exactly what kind of people you really are." Derek turned to look at me. "The will, you'll change it back now, right? We proved ourselves. We survived what you put us through." I smiled at him, and something in that smile made him shrink back in his seat. "Oh, my dear boy," I said softly, "this was never about the money." The ride back to civilization passed in tense silence. Derek and Jessica huddled in their seats like wounded animals, occasionally sipping water from the bottles I'd provided, but mostly just staring out the windows with thousand-yard stares. I understood that look. I'd worn it myself 2 weeks ago. Every few miles, one of them would glance at me nervously, as if trying to figure out what I was thinking, what I might do next. The balance of power between us had shifted so completely that they barely seemed like the same people who had laughed as they drove away from me in this same desert. When we reached the main highway, Derek finally found his voice. "Where are we going?" he asked quietly. "Home," I replied simply. "Your home or ours?" I glanced at him. "Does it matter? You're alive. That's more consideration than you gave me." He flinched and fell silent again. Jessica spoke up from the back seat, her voice small and hoarse. "Sierra, what we did was wrong. Unforgivably wrong. But what you just did to us." "What I just did," I interrupted calmly, "was give you a taste of your own medicine. The difference is, I came back for you." "You tortured us," she whispered. "I educated you." I pulled into a gas station to fill up the tank, and while the pump ran, I turned to face them both. "Let me explain something to you," I said, my voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "What happened in that desert 2 weeks ago wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. It was a deliberate attempt to get rid of me so you could inherit my money sooner rather than later." "That's not true," Derek started. "Don't." The single word cut through the air, like a blade. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying to me again." I heard Jessica's voicemails, remember? The ones where she called me a selfish bitch for not dying conveniently? Jessica's face went white. "You wanted me gone," I continued. "You wanted my money. You figured a 60-year-old woman couldn't possibly survive in the desert, and when my body was eventually found, it would look like a tragic accident during a family road trip." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the mechanical clicking of the gas pump. "The problem with your plan," I said finally, is that you underestimated me. You saw a soft, aging woman who would be easy to dispose of. What you didn't see was a survivor. I replaced the gas nozzle and got back in the car. Buckle up. We're almost home. I drove them to their condo first, a sleek modern building in West Hollywood that I'd helped Derek buy with a down payment gift 2 years earlier. They climbed out of the car slowly, like people recovering from a long illness. Derek lingered by the driver's side window. Mom, I need you to know I never wanted to hurt you. Not really. I looked up at him. This man I'd given birth to, raised, loved unconditionally for 32 years. The man who had left me to die in the desert and called it a joke. But you did hurt me, Derek. In ways I'm not sure I'll ever get over. Can we try to fix this? Start over somehow. I considered his question for a long moment. Do you remember when you were 7 years old and you lied to me about breaking Mrs. Patterson's window with your baseball? He blinked, confused by the apparent non sequitur. Yes, I think so. I knew you were lying. I knew it from the moment you opened your mouth. But I gave you chance after chance to tell the truth. Do you remember what you did? His face flushed. I kept lying. You kept lying. Even when I said I'd already talked to Mrs. Patterson and knew what had happened, you looked me in the eye and lied to me. Do you remember what I told you then? You said. He swallowed hard. You said that trust was like a vase. Once it's broken, you can glue the pieces back together, but it's never the same. The cracks always show. That's right. And, Derek. I put the car in drive. You didn't just crack the vase this time. You shattered it. I drove away, leaving them standing in the parking lot of their expensive condo, looking lost and small against the backdrop of their materialistic life. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my garden among the roses I'd spent 20 years cultivating. The desert had changed me, but it hadn't destroyed my capacity to appreciate beauty. If anything, coming so close to death had made me more aware of the precious things in life.
My phone rang.
Derek, of course. Mom, please don't shut me out. I know I don't deserve it, but please, give me a chance to make this right. There is no making this right, Derek. There's only living with what you've done. The will. The will stands as written. You'll get your $5,000 when I die. I suggest you make it last. Mom, please. I'm not your mother anymore, Derek. Mothers don't abandon their children in the desert to die. And children don't do what you did to me. I hung up and turned off my phone. 3 hours later, Jessica showed up at my front door. She looked terrible, hair still matted, clothes wrinkled and dirty, her face streaked with dried tears and desert dust. But her eyes burned with a familiar fury. You can't do this, she said without preamble. You can't destroy Derek's life because you're angry. I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply choosing not to reward attempted murder with inheritance. It wasn't attempted murder. It was a stupid, thoughtless prank that went too far. Tell me, Jessica, when you were planning this prank, what did you think would happen to me? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Did you think I'd find a nice air-conditioned shelter and order room service? Did you imagine I'd call an Uber to come pick me up? Or did you think exactly what any reasonable person would think, that a 60-year-old woman left alone in the desert without water would die? We thought you'd figure something out. No, you didn't. You thought I'd die, and you were fine with that because it meant Derek would inherit my money sooner. Don't insult both of us by pretending otherwise. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to find some angle that would get her what she wanted. What if I left him? She said suddenly. What if I divorced Derek and disappeared from your lives forever? Would you change the will back then? The question caught me off guard. Of all the things I'd expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. You'd leave Derek to get his inheritance back? He deserves better than this, she said, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was already figuring out how to get Derek to give her half of whatever he inherited.
I almost laughed.
Jessica, dear, you still don't understand. This isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. The desert showed me exactly who my son really is and exactly who I am. Neither of those people is who I thought they were. So, that's it? You're just going to cut him off forever? I'm going to live my life, I said simply, without the burden of pretending that family bonds matter more than basic human decency. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking angrily on my sidewalk. I watched her get into a taxi. Apparently, they'd lost the Range Rover keys at some point during their desert adventure. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new routine that felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. I woke early each morning, tended my garden with renewed purpose, and found myself actually enjoying simple pleasures I'd forgotten about during years of walking on eggshells around Jessica's moods and Derek's emotional demands. But Los Angeles is deceptively small for such a sprawling city. When you've lived somewhere for decades, your paths inevitably cross with people from your past, whether you want them to or not. The first sighting happened at our shared bank branch 3 weeks after the desert incident. I was making a deposit when I heard a familiar voice raised in frustration. Derek stood at the teller window, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, wrinkled shirt, 2 days of stubble, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He was arguing with the young teller about overdraft fees, his voice carrying that edge of desperation I'd never heard from him before. This was my son who'd always prided himself on financial success, who'd bragged about his investment portfolio and his perfect credit score. When he turned from the window, our eyes met across the marble lobby. For a split second, hope flashed across his features. The same expression he'd worn as a little boy when he thought he might escape punishment for some misdeed. He took a step toward me, mouth opening to speak. I turned and walked out without acknowledging him. My hands shook slightly as I got into my car, but it wasn't from fear or sadness. It was from the rush of standing my ground, of refusing to be drawn back into the dysfunction that had nearly cost me my life. A week later, I encountered Jessica at the grocery store I'd shopped at for 15 years. She was in the wine aisle. Not surprising, given her drinking habits, loading bottle after bottle into her cart. But where she'd once been meticulously put together, now she looked frayed around the edges. Her usually perfect blonde highlights were showing dark roots, and she'd lost weight in a way that made her look gaunt rather than fashionable. She spotted me before I could change aisles. "Enjoying your revenge?" she hissed, abandoning any pretense of civility. I paused and really looked at her, this woman who had orchestrated my near murder and called it entertainment. "I'm not taking revenge, Jessica. I'm simply living my life without you in it." "Same thing," she spat. "No," I said quietly, surprised by my own calm. "Revenge would be me calling the police and pressing charges for attempted murder. This is just natural consequences." Her face flushed red, but I was already walking away. I could hear her muttering behind me, something about vindictive old bitch, but the words bounced off me like rain off a well-oiled coat. It was the encounter at Derek's advertising firm that really showed me how far their world had crumbled. I'd had lunch downtown with my friend Margaret and was walking back to my car when movement in a familiar office building caught my eye. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Derek in heated conversation with a man in an expensive suit. Clearly his boss, given the power dynamics playing out in their body language. The older man was gesturing sharply toward the door, while Derek's shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched, frozen, as my son gathered items from his desk into a cardboard box. His hands trembled as he packed up the career he'd worked so hard to build, the job he'd been so proud of when he'd first landed it. He'd been fired. Something twisted in my chest, Not sympathy exactly, but the complex pain of watching someone you once loved destroy themselves. This was the brilliant boy who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd been promoted twice in 3 years, who'd had such a bright future ahead of him. As he emerged from the building carrying his box of belongings, Derek looked like a broken man. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the shuffle of someone who'd lost not just his job, but his sense of who he was. I could have approached him, could have offered comfort, or at least acknowledgement of his pain. Instead, I got in my car and drove home, because the woman who would have rushed to comfort her son no matter what he'd done had died in that desert. What remained was someone who understood that actions have consequences, even for people you love. The Neighborhood Gossip Network, more efficient than any intelligence agency, gradually filled in the details of their unraveling. Derek's performance at work had been declining for weeks. He'd been missing deadlines, showing up late, sometimes breaking down in meetings. The final straw had come when he'd started crying during a client presentation, babbling about mothers and forgiveness and mistakes that couldn't be undone. Without Derek's salary, they couldn't afford their upscale lifestyle. The Range Rover was repossessed. The condo went into foreclosure. Jessica's part-time gallery job barely covered her shopping addiction, let alone their living expenses. I learned all this not through active investigation, but simply by living my life in a city where everyone's business eventually becomes everyone else's knowledge. A friend would mention seeing Derek at a job interview, looking desperate. Another would report Jessica applying for work at less prestigious galleries, her resume clearly exaggerated. Each piece of information landed in my consciousness like drops of water filling a bucket. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with a sense of cosmic justice being served. One evening in late spring, as I sat in my garden with a glass of wine and a biography I was enjoying, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But curiosity has always been one of my weaknesses. Derek stood on my doorstep, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. He'd lost at least 20 pounds, his clothes hung loose on his thin frame, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who'd been staring into an abyss for months. "Mom," he said quietly, and something in his voice made me step aside rather than close the door. He stood in my living room, the same room where he'd played with toys as a toddler, where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd watched movies together during countless Sunday afternoons. Now he looked lost in it, like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. "I lost my job," he said finally. "I know. Jessica left me." This was new information, but I simply nodded. "She said." His voice cracked. "She said she couldn't stay with someone who'd thrown away a fortune for a stupid prank. She took what money we had left and moved in with some guy from the gallery. A married guy with money." I felt a flicker of something that might have been vindication. Jessica's true nature was finally showing, even to Derek. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I meant it. "No, you're not." He looked at me with eyes that reminded me painfully of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. "You're glad. You wanted this to happen." The accusation hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to deny it, to reassure him that I took no pleasure in his pain. But the woman I'd become in that desert didn't traffic in comfortable lies anymore. "What I wanted," I said slowly, "was for my son to be the kind of man who wouldn't abandon his mother in the desert to die. What I wanted was to trust the people I loved most in the world. What I wanted was a family that saw me as a person worth protecting, not an obstacle to overcome." Derek sank into my favorite armchair, the one he'd curled up in as a child when he was sick or scared. "I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't take back driving away while you stood there alone. But, Mom, I'm drowning here. I've lost everything." "Not everything," I said quietly. "You still have your life. That's more than you were prepared to give me." He buried his face in his hands, and when he looked up, tears were streaming down his cheeks. I think about it every day. Every single day. I see your face when we drove away. I hear you calling my name. I imagine you walking through that desert, scared and hurt, and thinking your own son had tried to murder you. For just a moment, my resolve wavered. This broken man was still my child, still the baby I'd held and loved and protected for 32 years. But then I remembered the sound of their laughter as they abandoned me. You're going to have to learn to live with those images, I said. Because I live with them too. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. Is there nothing I can do? Nothing at all that would make you consider not forgiving me? I know that's too much to ask, but maybe just not cutting me off forever? I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the subtle entitlement that had always lurked beneath his apologies. But all I saw was genuine anguish and a desperation that seemed to come from finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. Tell me something honestly, Derek. When you and Jessica were planning this prank, what did you really think would happen to me? The question hung between us like a sword. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. I thought. He swallowed hard. I thought you'd be terrified. Really, genuinely terrified. And maybe you'd realize how much you needed us. How much you needed me. And if I died out there? Another endless pause. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I told myself that wouldn't happen. That you were too smart, too resourceful. But I knew it was possible. And I was okay with that risk because I was angry. Angry that you were so independent, that you didn't need me the way I needed your money. The brutal honesty of his admission hit me like a physical blow. But it was the first completely truthful thing he'd said to me since this nightmare began. At least you're being honest now, I said. Does that count for anything? I considered the question seriously. It counts for something, but not enough to change what I've decided. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. What happens now? Now you figure out who Derek really is when he can't rely on his mother's money to solve his problems. You learn to live with the consequences of trying to murder the person who loved you most in the world. And us? Is there any possibility of us ever? I looked at him sitting in that chair where he'd once been my innocent little boy, now a man who'd proven himself capable of unspeakable cruelty. The maternal instinct to comfort him was still there, would probably always be there. But it was tempered now by something stronger, the knowledge of what he was truly capable of. Ask me again in 10 years, I said finally, when you've proven you can be a decent human being without my money making it easy. He stood slowly, looking older than his 32 years. At the door, he turned back. I love you, Mom. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do love you. I love you too, Derek. That's exactly why this hurts so much. After he left, I sat in my garden until the stars came out, thinking about love and consequences and the difference between the two. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled at the moon, and I remembered another desert night when those same sounds had terrified me. Now they sounded like freedom. The seasons changed, and I settled deeper into my new life. Summer brought longer days in my garden. Fall brought crisp mornings perfect for hiking, and winter brought the kind of peace I'd never experienced when my phone was constantly ringing with Derek's needs or Jessica's demands. I started traveling, something I'd always meant to do, but had postponed while managing family crises. I spent 2 weeks in England touring gardens, a month in Italy learning about wine, and a glorious spring in Japan watching cherry blossoms bloom. Each trip reminded me that there was an entire world beyond the narrow confines of family dysfunction. But Derek's struggles followed me even when I tried to forget them. 6 months after our last conversation, I received a call that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Sampson? This is Dr. Rivera at Cedars-Sinai. Your son Derek was brought in by ambulance this evening. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might be dead. But it turned out to be severe anxiety and exhaustion masquerading as a heart attack. Derek had collapsed at the restaurant where he'd been working double shifts to make ends meet, clutching his chest and unable to breathe. I didn't visit him in the hospital, but I sent flowers. White roses for new beginnings with a simple card. Get well soon. See. When he called to thank me, his voice was weak but clearer than it had been in months. The flowers were beautiful, Mom. Thank you. You're welcome. Are you taking care of yourself? I'm trying. It's hard sometimes. The guilt is like carrying a stone in my chest all the time. Have you considered therapy? I've been going for 3 months now. Dr. Martinez, she's helping me understand what I did. Not just to you, but to myself.
He paused.
She says the guilt is appropriate, that I should feel guilty about trying to kill my own mother. But she's also teaching me how to live with it without destroying myself. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of pride that he was finally getting help. I'm glad you're talking to someone. She reminds me of you, actually. The way you used to be, before I ruined everything. The pain in his voice was so raw it made my chest ache. Derek, you need to understand something. What happened between us can't be fixed with therapy and good intentions. Some things are broken beyond repair. I know, he whispered. I know that. I just miss you. I miss having a mom. His words hit me like a physical blow. I miss having a son too. But the son I raised tried to kill me in the desert. And I don't know how to reconcile those two people in my mind. We hung up, and I found myself crying for the first time since that night under the desert stars. Not for Derek's current suffering, but for the loss of the relationship we'd once had. For the death of the naive woman who'd believed family love was unconditional and unbreakable. 2 weeks later, I learned through the neighborhood network that Jessica had married her gallery colleague after his wife discovered the affair and filed for divorce. It was apparently a lavish ceremony in Malibu, paid for entirely by her new husband's guilt and wallet. She'd gotten exactly what she'd always wanted: access to wealth without having to wait for an inheritance or deal with inconvenient family members. As spring turned to summer, Derek sent me occasional updates through birthday and holiday cards. Brief notes about his life. He'd been promoted to assistant manager at the restaurant. He'd started taking night classes to finish his business degree. He'd adopted a rescue dog named Charlie, who helped with his anxiety. I never responded, but I kept the cards. Despite everything, he was still my son, and some part of me needed to know he was surviving. 1 year after the desert incident, I did something I'd never expected to do. I drove back to the place where they'd abandoned me. It was another clear March morning, the kind of day that makes you believe in second chances. I parked on the same dirt road and walked to the Joshua tree that had witnessed my abandonment, the rocks where I'd found shade, the endless expanse of sand where I'd thought I might die. Standing there in the bright sunshine, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. This harsh, beautiful place had nearly killed me, but it had also shown me who I really was underneath all the people-pleasing and excuse-making. It had burned away everything soft and accommodating, leaving only the essential core of who Sierra Sampson truly was. That woman was harder than the one who'd gotten into Derek's car that day, but she was also more honest, more self-respecting, and ultimately more at peace with herself. As I stood there remembering, a family drove up, parents and 2 young children stopping to take photos of the desert landscape. They laughed and posed against the backdrop of endless sky, and I remembered when Derek had been that age, when family trips had been adventures rather than potential murder plots. I watched them for a few minutes, then walked back to my car with a heart that felt both heavy and light. Heavy with loss, but light with the freedom that comes from accepting reality instead of fighting it. That evening, I called my lawyer one final time to update my will. Not to restore Derek's inheritance. That wasn't going to happen, but to add a letter he would receive along with his $5,000 bequest. The letter explained everything. Why I'd made the choices I'd made, how his betrayal had affected both of us, and what I hoped he would learn from losing the mother who had loved him unconditionally for 32 years. I ended it with, "I never stopped loving you, Derek. But I learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. You taught me that lesson in the cruelest way possible, but perhaps it was a lesson I needed to learn. I hope someday you'll understand that letting you face the full consequences of your actions was the last gift I could give you as your mother." After my lawyer filed the documents, I felt a completion I hadn't experienced in over a year. The circle was closed, the accounts balanced, the debt paid in full. 3 months later, Derek sent me a card for my 60th birthday. It was elegant and simple, containing a message that surprised me. "Happy birthday, Mom. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I understand now why you had to cut me off. It was the right choice, even though it breaks my heart. I hope you're happy and healthy. You deserve both. Love always, Derek." For the first time in our correspondence, there was no request for forgiveness, no attempt to manipulate me into changing my mind, no guilt or self-pity. Just acceptance of reality and genuine wishes for my well-being. It was, I realized, the most mature thing he'd ever said to me. That night, I slept better than I had in 2 years. 2 years after the desert incident, I woke up on a bright California morning and realized something profound. I was happy. Not the frantic, people-pleasing happiness I'd mistaken for contentment during my years of managing Derek's needs and Jessica's moods, but genuine peace. The kind that comes from living authentically, with clear boundaries and honest relationships. My days had settled into a rhythm that felt both purposeful and joyful. I volunteered at the animal shelter 3 mornings a week, working with abandoned and abused animals who understood something about betrayal and recovery. I discovered I had a gift for helping damaged creatures learn to trust again, perhaps because I'd become something of an expert on the subject myself. I'd also started consulting work, helping other people restore historic homes. My own Victorian had been featured in a preservation magazine, leading to requests for advice from homeowners across the state. There was something satisfying about helping people see potential in damaged things, about proving that with enough care and the right approach, almost anything could be brought back to life. The traveling continued too. I'd spent a month in New Zealand hiking and learning about Maori culture, 2 weeks in Morocco exploring ancient cities, and a glorious spring in Greece visiting archaeological sites I'd dreamed about since college. Each journey reminded me that the world was vast and full of wonders that had nothing to do with family drama or old wounds. My social life had expanded as well. I joined a hiking group for women over 50, started taking pottery classes, and even begun dating again. Nothing serious, but pleasant companionship with men who appreciated independence rather than seeing it as a threat to their ego. Most surprisingly, I'd started writing. What began as journal entries processing the trauma of Derek's betrayal had evolved into essays about family relationships, boundaries, and the courage required to save yourself from people who claim to love you. Several had been published in women's magazines, and I was considering a book. Derek and I had settled into a pattern of minimal contact that felt sustainable. Holiday cards, brief notes acknowledging birthdays and major milestones, nothing more. His updates showed a man slowly rebuilding his life. He'd completed his degree, been promoted to restaurant manager, started dating someone new, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who apparently had no interest in his family's money because she didn't know it existed. I felt no joy in his struggles, but no regret in my choices either. Some lessons could only be learned through loss, and Derek was finally learning who he was when he couldn't rely on Mother's wealth to solve his problems. Jessica had faded into irrelevance. Her marriage to the gallery owner was reportedly stormy. Surprise, surprise, and I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she was already looking for her next wealthy mark. She was someone else's problem now, just as she'd always been someone else's daughter, someone else's student, someone else's employee. A beautiful parasite who'd learned to survive by attaching herself to hosts until she'd drained them dry. On the third anniversary of the desert incident, I did something that felt like a ritual. I drove back to that place one more time, but this time I brought something with me. I'd written a letter to the woman I used to be, the one who'd gotten into Derek's car that morning believing in unconditional family love, who'd made excuses for cruelty, who'd confused enabling with kindness. I wanted to say goodbye to her properly, with gratitude for the lessons her suffering had taught me. Standing beside the Joshua tree under the vast desert sky, I read the letter aloud to the wind and sand, then burned it in a small fire I'd built in a metal container. As the smoke rose into the crystalline air, I felt something release from my chest, the last bit of anger and regret I'd been carrying. "Thank you," I said to the desert, to the woman I'd been, to the universe that had given me the strength to survive and transform. "Thank you for showing me who I really am." Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The rearview mirror showed only empty road behind me. No pursuers, no regrets, no unfinished business. Just the clean, straight line of a life moving forward with purpose and peace. That evening, I updated my will one final time, adding a scholarship fund in my name for women over 50 who were starting new careers after leaving abusive relationships. It felt like the perfect way to honor what I'd learned and to help other women discover their own strength. A month later, I received an envelope that made me pause. The return address showed Derek's name, but something about the handwriting looked different, more careful, more mature somehow. Inside was a photograph, Derek with a pretty brunette woman and a small boy who looked to be about 6 years old. On the back, he'd written, "Mom, I wanted you to meet Sarah and her son Tommy. We're getting married next month. Sarah doesn't know about what I did to you. I've never told her because I'm too ashamed. But she's helped me become the kind of man you tried to raise me to be. I thought you should know that your lessons eventually took root, even if it took losing you for me to understand them. I love you and I'm sorry. Always, Derek." I stared at that photograph for a long time, seeing in Derek's face something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine happiness. Not the manic, desperate joy of someone trying to convince themselves they were fine, but the quiet contentment of a man who'd found his place in the world through his own efforts. The little boy was grinning at the camera, gap-toothed and innocent, and something about his expression reminded me of Derek at that age. Before entitlement and poor choices had twisted him into someone I couldn't recognize. I put the photograph on my refrigerator, not as a sign that I was ready to reconcile, but as acknowledgement that people could change if they were willing to do the hard work. Derek was finally becoming the man I'd always hoped he could be, not because of my support or my money, but because losing both had forced him to find his own strength. 3 days later, I did something that surprised even me. I sent a wedding gift. Not money and not my presents, but something more meaningful. I sent Sarah a first edition copy of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings with an inscription. For Sarah, who helped someone I love remember how to fly. With gratitude, Sierra. I didn't hear back from them, and I didn't expect to. It wasn't about opening communication. It was about acknowledging that Derek had found someone who saw value in him beyond his bank account, someone who was helping him become worthy of love through his own efforts rather than through inherited wealth. 6 months later, I received one final card from Derek. It contained a photo of him, Sarah, and Tommy at what looked like a school play, all 3 of them laughing at something off camera. The note was brief. "Thank you for the book, Mom. Sarah treasures it, and so do I. I understand now that the greatest gift you ever gave me was teaching me that I had to earn love and respect. It took losing you for me to learn that lesson, but I finally have. I hope you're proud of the man I'm becoming." I was proud, I realized. Not proud enough to let him back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, but proud that the boy I'd raised still existed somewhere inside the man who had tried to kill me. That night, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine and my journal, writing about forgiveness and consequences and the difference between the two. The moon was full, casting silver light on my roses, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of coyotes singing to the stars.
Once, that sound had terrified me.
Now it sounded like freedom. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the full consequences of their choices. That family loyalty has limits, and those limits are necessary for survival. That you can love someone deeply while refusing to be destroyed by them. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was strong enough to save myself, even from the people I loved most in the world. At 62, I discovered what many people never learn, that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. That boundaries aren't walls, they're foundations. That sometimes the end of one story is really the beginning of a much better one. The blood price had been paid in full, not in death, which is what Derek and Jessica had intended, but in the death of illusions, the severing of toxic bonds, and the birth of a woman who knew her own worth. I was finally completely free, and my new life was going to be magnificent.
Wow.
Just wow. Sierra's journey from victim to victor is absolutely incredible, isn't it? If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own boundaries and relationships, please hit that like button right now. It helps us share these powerful stories with more people who need to hear them. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Have you ever been underestimated because of your age or gender? Share your story. This community supports each other, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And here's something I need you to understand. If you're currently in a situation where family members are treating you as disposable, where people who claim to love you are actually harming you, you are not too old to start over. You are not powerless. Sierra was 59 when her life completely transformed, and she rebuilt something even more beautiful than what she'd lost. That's exactly why we created our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. It's packed with practical strategies for setting boundaries, rebuilding your self-worth, and creating a life that honors who you really are. The link is in the description box below. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to put yourself first. Click that link and start your transformation today. If this story inspired you, subscribe to Her Real Stories and ring that notification bell. We share incredible tales of survival and strength every week. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Sierra's message of empowerment. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is save yourself. Remember, your story isn't over. Your best chapters might still be waiting to be written. Just like Sierra, you're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more valuable than anyone who doesn't treat you with respect. Until next time, keep fighting for yourself because you are absolutely worth fighting for.